The sun was only beginning to rise over the city, brushing the rooftops with shades of pale gold. The air was heavy with the scent of car fumes, dust, and the faint sweetness of the flowers that little Matteo carried in his hands. He stood at the corner of a busy intersection, the kind of place where no one looked twice at anyone. To most people rushing by, he was invisible, a boy in torn shoes, holding a bundle of roses wrapped in faded newspaper. But if you looked closely, you'd see something else. Behind those tired eyes and that quiet, polite smile, there was a kind of strength that only comes from hardship. Matteo had learned, far too early, that the world wasn't always kind to those who had little. Every morning before the traffic lights turned green, he would dart between cars, offering flowers to strangers. "One rose for someone you love," he'd say, his voice barely rising above the sound of engines. Some drivers ignored him, some waved him away. A few rolled down their windows, handed him a coin, and took a rose without meeting his eyes. He always smiled anyway, whispering a thank you, even when they didn't hear it. But this morning was different. The city felt colder, the people more hurried, the world somehow heavier. Matteo had woken up late because the rain had leaked through the ceiling of the small room he shared with his mother, soaking the thin blanket they used. His mother had coughed all night, her body weak from an illness she could no longer afford to treat. So Matteo promised himself he would sell every single flower that day, no matter what it took. At a cafe nearby, a group of young adults sat at an outdoor table, sipping expensive coffee, laughing loudly, the kind of laughter that fills the street with confidence and carelessness. When they saw Matteo approach, one of them raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Hey, kid," he said mockingly. "How much for the wilted ones?" His friends chuckled. Matteo hesitated, but still held out his flowers. "Just $1, sir. Please, they're fresh," he said softly. The boy reached into his pocket, pulled out a few coins and tossed them onto the ground. "There's your $1, flower boy. Pick it up." His friends laughed louder, clinking their cups together as if celebrating something. Matteo crouched slowly, picking up the coins one by one, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back his pride. He didn't say a word. He just nodded politely and offered one of the roses to the man who had mocked him. But the man waved it away. "Keep it, champ," he said sarcastically. "You'll need it more than I do." The laughter echoed through the street as Matteo turned away. If you believe that no one deserves to be humiliated for trying to survive, that kindness is worth more than pride, then take a second right now to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in decency. Because what happened next will remind you that goodness can come from the most unexpected places. Matteo walked toward a quiet bench near the bus stop, sitting down to rest. His small hands clutched the few coins he had gathered. Not enough for dinner, not enough for medicine. He looked down at the flowers, some petals crushed, others still perfect, and whispered an apology to his mother as if she could hear him from miles away. A man nearby had been watching all of this unfold. He was dressed simply, a worn leather jacket, jeans, and eyes that carried a certain gravity. He looked to be in his 40s, the kind of man who spoke little but noticed everything. He had seen the laughter, the coins on the ground, the way the boy had swallowed his pain and kept going. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he stood, walked over, and sat beside Matteo. "You sell these flowers every day?" he asked gently. Matteo looked up, startled but polite. "Yes, sir, every day. They help me buy food for my mother." The man nodded slowly, looking at the flowers. "How much for all of them?" Matteo blinked. "All of them?" he repeated, unsure if he'd heard right. "Yes," the man said, smiling softly. "Every last one." Matteo's face lit up with disbelief. That's $15, sir." The man reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp bill, and placed it in the boy's hand. "15, huh?" he said with a grin. "How about we make it 50? He handed him another bill. Matteo's lips parted, words failing him. He shook his head. "No, sir, I can't. That's too much." But the man insisted. "You've earned it, son. And I think these flowers deserve to go somewhere special." The boy watched in awe as the man stood, holding the bundle of roses as carefully as if they were made of glass. Before he left, he turned back and said, "Take care of your mother, and don't let people like them tell you what you're worth." Then he walked down the street and disappeared into the crowd. That could have been the end of it, a small act of kindness in a cruel world. But it wasn't, because the next morning, everything changed again. When Mateo reached his usual corner, there was already a small crowd waiting. He didn't understand at first. People were holding flowers, his flowers, and right in the center stood the man from yesterday, talking to a group of reporters. Mateo froze. The man looked up, smiled, and waved him over. As Mateo approached, he noticed something he hadn't before. The man's jacket had a small emblem on the sleeve, the logo of one of the city's biggest companies. Cameras clicked as the man knelt beside Mateo. "This," he said to the reporters, "is the boy I was telling you about. Yesterday I saw something that broke my heart, and I realized it is not the world that needs to change. It's us." The crowd listened in silence. The man continued. "While others laughed at this boy, he showed more dignity and courage than anyone else on that street. And that's the kind of person I want representing my company." He turned to Mateo. "How would you like to come work with us, son? We could use someone with your spirit." Mateo's mouth fell open. "Me? But I don't know anything about offices or work." The man smiled. "You know about perseverance, you know about respect. That's more than enough." It turned out that the man was the CEO of a large flower distribution company. He had once grown up in poverty himself, selling roses on the same streets Mateo now walked. Life had changed for him, but he never forgot where he came from. When he saw Mateo that day, it was like looking into a mirror from years ago. By that afternoon, social media was flooded with pictures of Mateo and the man standing together, smiling in front of a truck filled with flowers. The story spread like wildfire. People wrote messages of love and outrage, promising to treat others with more compassion. Strangers started buying flowers from kids on the street just to make them smile. And at the cafe, the same group of young adults who had mocked Mateo scrolled through their phones, seeing the headlines with shame in their eyes. A few days later, Mateo returned to that same cafe, not as a vendor, but as a guest. The man had invited him to lunch along with his mother, now recovering and smiling for the first time in months. The waiter pulled out their chairs and the entire place went quiet. Those who had once laughed at him now whispered apologies. Mateo didn't need revenge. He simply smiled and said, "Thank you," the same way he always had. The owner of the company placed a hand on his shoulder. "You know, you reminded me of something," he said. "Sometimes life gives us thorns before it lets us hold the roses." And in that simple moment, surrounded by kindness and redemption, Mateo realized that everything his mother had ever told him was true, that dignity is not measured by what you have, but by how you carry yourself when you have nothing. Weeks passed, and Mateo began helping at the flower company after school. He learned how the flowers were grown, how they were packed, how each petal carried a story of patience. He became somewhat of a local hero, though he never sought attention. All he wanted was to make enough to care for his mother, and maybe one day help other children like him. But what touched people most wasn't his success, it was his humility. He still stopped at the same intersection sometimes, not to sell, but to hand out free roses to strangers. "One rose for someone you love," he'd say with that same gentle voice, "and one to remind you that kindness never goes unnoticed." The story of the boy with the flowers became a symbol of hope in a city that had almost forgotten what empathy looked like. Teachers told it in classrooms. Parents shared it with their children before bed. And that cafe, the same one where the laughter had once cut through the air, became a place where people now paid it forward, leaving extra tips for struggling workers and free meals for those who needed them. The CEO never took credit. He always said the story belonged to Mateo. "I just listened," he would say, "and sometimes listening is enough to change everything." Even years later, people would still recognize Mateo on the street. "You're the flower boy, aren't you?" they'd say with a smile. And he'd nod, laughing softly. Maybe I was. But now, I'm just someone trying to give a little of what I got. If you believe that kindness can rewrite someone's story, that compassion is stronger than pride, and that one simple act can ripple through the world, then take a moment right now to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Rewind Reality. Because every time you do, you help stories like Mateo's reach someone who needs it most. Before we go, I have a question for you. If you were there that day, if you saw the boy with the flowers being mocked, what would you have done? Would you have turned away or would you have stepped in? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your words might inspire someone else to choose kindness when it matters most. And remember, sometimes the smallest act of goodness can bloom into something extraordinary.